chairwoman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Crane for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. I want to say thank you to those of you on the panel for showing up. I want to start with just asking the panel generally, do you trust the federal government to censor speech? I'll start with you, Mr. Schellenberg.
No.
I do not.
The government should not be censoring speech.
Absolutely not.
Would all of you gentlemen say that generally you're students of history? Generally?
Generally.
Okay. What kind of governments typically are most likely to censor their people? Mr. Schellenberg, I'll start with you.
Authoritarian and totalitarian ones.
Yeah. What about you, sir?
I agree.
I agree.
Mr. Lukowski?
I agree, and I'd add ones that aren't confident in their own abilities to govern.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, why do you think these types of governments typically want to control and censor the speech of their own citizens?
Because they are behaving undemocratically in a variety of ways, and they don't want to be called out for it.
Absolutely. What about you, Mr. Chenoweth?
Well, I think there's many reasons. I think they want to hold on to power, and anything that's happening in their society that appears to be out of control, or that's out of their power, is something that is a threat to them, being dislodged from power. And so they want to control the information atmosphere in order to hold on to power.
Mr. Abdo?
Generally to silence dissent.
Mr. Lukowski?
I would say it's out of a sense of arrogance, the sense that they're right and that anyone who disagrees with them is wrong, and that needs to be corrected through a proper degree of humility.
Mr. Lukowski, do you see any of those signs that you just pointed out, the arrogance in this federal government?
Absolutely. I think it was on vivid display during the COVID response and a number of other areas.
Mr. Schellenberger, how about you? Do you see any of those signs in this current government?
Yes, many signs.
Do you think it's rational to believe that a private company, even one as large as Twitter or Facebook, might feel intimidated or coerced if the most powerful government in the history of the world contacted them to alert them to a post that they found problematic?
Yes, and we saw that intimidation repeatedly in the Twitter files.
What about the rest of you guys? You think they might feel coerced or intimidated?
Absolutely, and we've had 4 federal judges who have found that in fact that happened.
In your opinion, do you think the American people have any reason to question the official narratives put out by this government, both this one right now and past governments?
Yes, many reasons.
Mr. Schellenberger, can you go into a short list of official positions that they've released on certain things that you found to be problematic and rightly see the American people as being rational to question those narratives?
I would say the Afghanistan pullout, the Ukraine war, the lack of transparency on COVID origins, the cost of the Inflation Reduction Act, viability of renewables. Anyway, how long do you have?
Yeah, I had some of those same ones on my list. What about the Hunter Biden laptop? Would that be on your list, sir?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was clearly a disinformation campaign that involved existing and former government officials.
Yeah, what do you gentlemen typically think when you see the billboards pulled up with official statements from individuals at CISA? You know, nothing to see here, nothing to see here. What do you guys think about that? Just more of the same CYA, cover your ass type deals? Mr. Schellenberger, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm mixed between it being sinister and comedic.
Yeah. What about you, Mr. Chenoweth?
I think that there's a misimpression on the part of some of these individuals that if they act through third parties that they're not violating the First Amendment. They're wrong about that, but they're not all lawyers, I get that. But they need to understand that they are blatantly violating the First Amendment when they work through third parties to achieve censorship.
Mr. Abdi, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, Congressman. I think the question, the constitutional one that the Supreme Court set out in 1963, is whether the government has coerced the suppression of speech. And I'll give you just a couple of examples where I think it's actually important for the government to be able to contribute to public discourse and also to contribute to persuading private actors into making decisions about the speech. In 2004, the New York Times was leaked information about the Bush administration's warrantless wiretapping program. And members of the Bush administration met with the New York Times and convinced the New York Times that to disclose that information in 2004 would result in deaths in the disclosure of undercover sources. And the New York Times held on to that story for a year. I happen to think the New York Times probably made the wrong decision in being persuaded by the Bush administration to hold on to that story for a year. But I think it's relevant to the New York Times' decision-making what the government thinks about the likelihood that disclosing that information would cause real harm to the national security interests of the United States, even though the New York Times' publication of that story was unquestionably constitutionally protected. And so I think there is a role for government in persuading private actors to take into account the harms of the independent editorial decisions they make.
Thank you, Mr.
But the New York
Chairman.
Times that was the New York Times' own speech that it was holding back on, not a third party's speech.
I think that the Bantam Books case is a case about third-party speech. It was a lawsuit brought against, I think inconsistently with what you said earlier, Mr. Chenoweth, it was a lawsuit brought against the Rhode Island Commission on Morality and Youth, arguing that that commission had exceeded its authority in attempting to coerce book distributors and publishers into taking off of their shelves material that the commission had deemed to be obscene or offensive. And I think
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. I think the witnesses, I'd actually love to hear from all of you more. Our time is unfortunately limited. We have another panel.